Hi everyone, in this video we are going to be making a tulip wrap bracelet. And the reason I wanted to make a wrap bracelet with a tulip design is because when you see tulips being planted and landscaped, they're usually grouped and organized by color, and the effect is quite beautiful. And I thought it would be cute if we made a wrap bracelet where one round is one color, and then another round is another color, and then the third round is another color, and that way it'll look like rows of tulips that are planted by color. So for this bracelet I will be using a 12mm sliding end tube clasp. So if you've seen my previous wrap bracelet tutorial video, you know that we need to modify this loom a little bit so that we can create that wrap. And this loom, I got this from Dollarama for $5, and it is in their crafts section, and the kit is called Beadweaving Kit. So to modify this loom so that we can create our wrap bracelet, the first thing I'm going to do is remove this thin piece of wood, and I'm also going to remove all of the knobs. And then I'm going to remove the wing nut. Then I'm going to push this slotted end piece out like that. Then I'm going to put this thin piece of wood into that spot over there, and it's just going to be wedged between this slotted end piece and the rods. So like this, and I'm going to push the end piece back. So now, as you can see, this thin piece of wood is wedged in there, and I'm just going to put the wing nuts back to tighten this end piece. Alright, so now that we have modified the loom and it's now a very simple frame with just a small piece of wood wedged in there, we're going to start warping. So for both of our vertical warp strands and our horizontal weft thread, I will be using John Bead Goodthread in the color Ivory, and that's because I just wanted something a bit warmer for this design, so I'm using this off-white warm tone. So this design is 7 beads wide, which means we're going to need 8 warp strands. And I will be doubling the first and the last warp strand. So from the center, count 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to place my strand on that slot, and also from the center, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop around to one corner, and I'm going to tie my knot on that corner. So let me zoom in. So I'm going to secure my thread on this corner. So let me just show you. So I'm going to tie a knot. So just a simple overhand knot. And I'm going to draw my knot down to this corner, that outer corner. And I'm going to make a second knot to secure the first knot. And I'm just going to tighten that knot so that it'll move and it'll be tight on that corner. So that's where my initial knot is, on that outer corner over there. So now I'm going to continuously warp around, and when we are warping, it's very important to organize your threads so they're not crisscrossing all over the place, and we're just placing the thread right next to each other. So for example, here I'm going to start warping. I'm going to place my thread next to that first thread, and then I'm going to loop around, and I'm going to double my first and my last strand. So I'm going to loop around and put my thread into the same slot that it was in before to double it like that. And also organize my thread so that it's sitting next to the first thread like this. So I'm gonna place my thread right there, and now the first strand is doubled. So now I'm gonna go to the second slot and I'm going to organize my thread, and I'm gonna place this thread next to the thread that was already there in the same direction that I am warping. And same for the back side. And place my thread into that second slot. So now I'm going to place my thread into that second slot. And now I have my thread in the second slot, also in the bottom. And now I'm going to make sure my thread is organized and place my thread next to the thread that was already there. So I'm not crisscrossing my thread, I'm keeping it organized and placing my thread always in the same order as the direction I'm going. So now I'm going to loop through the back. Place my thread properly like that. And keep going like that, next to the thread that was already there. Alright, so this is my 8th strand on my 8th slot, and I'm going to double it. So I'm just going to place my last strand in the last slot, and as you can see, I have kept all my threads organized and not crisscrossing. And I'm going to loop back, and same thing, I'm going to place my thread in the same slot to double that last strand. And same for the bottom. And from here, I'm going to cut my thread, give it some extra. So here is my doubled for my 8th strand, and I'm going to tie my knot using the first strand that was already there for the 8th slot. So I just put a piece of card so you can better see what I'm doing, but here is my 8th strand, and here is my doubling off that 8th strand, like that, right? Because it's going to be doubled. So I'm just going to tie my knot against this first strand. So there's my first knot, and I'm going to tighten it. And there is my second knot. So here are my 2 knots. There's 1 knot here and 1 knot here. So my strings are actually pretty taut, so I'm not going to do my trick of inserting a Sharpie between these strings and this edge board, but if yours is loose, then you can definitely do that, and you can watch any of my previous tutorials to see how to do it. So to figure out how long to make my wrap bracelet, I'm just going to take a tape measure and I'm going to wrap it around my wrist 3 times because I want to make a wrap bracelet that goes around my wrist 3 times. And I want it to be somewhat loose, so I would say 18 inches is good for me. And so 1 inch is going to be taken up by the clasp, so I need to make the beaded section 17 inches. So if you want, you can just do this with a piece of string and then measure the string afterwards if you don't have a tape measure. So for this pattern, I'm going to be doing a row of tulips in orange, one in yellow, and one in red. But you don't have to follow my colors. You can do any order you like, and I've also provided suggestions for other color combinations in my pattern. And also, I'm going to be doing 2 shades of green, but that's not necessary. You can just do 1 shade of green. And also, this is Olivia from the future, but I just wanted to let you know that for my 17-inch beaded section, I used up pretty much almost all of my 5 grams of espresso brown beads that I use as background. So if you're doing a longer section than me, then make sure to buy a few extra grams of beads, and each gram is about 200 beads. And also, as per usual, I'm going to flash a copy of my pattern on the screen. But if you're interested in a high resolution version that you can download to your devices or print out, then I have that on my Ko-fi page, and I will put a link to it in the description section below as well as in the comment section. So for this pattern, I have used 4 main flower colors: pink, yellow, orange, and red, and I have just done different combinations of them. So just pick the ones that you like for your wrap bracelet and go from there. And so I'm not going to have an accurate count of how many beads you're going to need, because the measurements for your wrist size could be different than mine, and also the colors you pick could be different than mine. So just be cognizant of that, and remember that you are going to need a lot of the brown background beads. Oh yeah, and before I forget, I just wanted to mention that if you wanted, you can actually also use this wrap bracelet as a necklace, because for me personally, 17 to 18 inches is a good size for me for a necklace. So I've cut myself about 5 to 6 feet for my horizontal weft thread, and it's the same thread that I'm using for my warp. And I'm just going to start like we usually do, which is to tie an overhand knot. And it's just a simple basic knot. And make sure that I have about 6 to 8 inches of tail left over that I can weave in later. And then I'm going to put the rest of my long side under all of my vertical warp strands like this. And then I'm going to put this longer side through my needle. Alright, so I'm going to position my knot a couple inches from this edge, and I'm going to pick up my first row. And when you're reading the pattern, we're going to go from left to right, bottom to top if you're right-handed, and you can also do the reverse of everything I'm doing if you're left-handed. So I'm just sliding down my first row, and I'm going to put a bead in each of the spaces, and I'm going to keep them in place by pushing them up with my finger like this. And then I'm going to put my needle through each bead and make sure that I'm going over all of the vertical warp strands. So not under, but over. So over and through each bead. And I'm going 1 bead at a time and arranging them as I go along from right to left, because that way I am fixing the bead to its space. And after I put my needle through it, it's not going to move anymore, so it's easier for me to control the beads that way. So just keep going. And this is only for the first row. Once we start with the second row, we will be able to narrow down the warp strands to the width of each bead to make it easier for subsequent rows. So just pull your needle and your thread through. So right now the vertical strands are too far apart, which makes it a little challenging to tighten your horizontal weft thread to make it so that the vertical strands will fit the beads. So I'm just going to adjust the spaces a little bit by moving the strings closer to each other in the slots. So I'm going to be using a blunt tapestry needle so that I don't scratch up the wood on this loom. And I'm just going to move the thread and put 2 in one slot like this. And I'm just going to put this double strand in the last slot like that. I'm going to do the same for the other side. So now, as you can see, it's much narrower and easier to pull this. So I'm just going to also do it for the top side. So now the vertical warp strands are fitting the beads better, but this won't be secure until we do a second row. So let's do a second row. So here's my second row, and I'm just going to pop them up into each of the spaces. And once again, I'm going to push it up with my finger and put my needle over all of the vertical warp strands and through each of the beads. And pull your needle through. And now when I pull this and tighten it up, the vertical warp strands are staying in place and they're fitting the width of the beads. So now I'm just going to stick a spare beading needle through this first row to maintain its alignment and also to make it stay in place. And that way I can just flush all of my rows against this first row and they should stay in alignment. And something I like to do is move this needle up as I go up on the pattern, and that helps me to maintain my alignment throughout the pattern. By the way, before I forget, the first row is going to disappear into your sliding end tube clasp. So if you want to just make the first row a single throwaway color, that would work. But I didn't do that here. But if you want to make that first row all brown, you can do so as well. So here's my third row, and from here on in, it should be a lot easier to pop up your beads through the vertical warp strand spaces because the size of the spaces fits your beads now. So now I'm just going to put my needle over and through each of the beads. And you're just going to keep going up the pattern, and I will meet you back when we are closer to the top section, and we will rotate this piece so that we can keep working. And for this section and for each of the sections, I will be doing about 5.5 inches, which is my wrist size, because that will make sure that it goes one round around my wrist. And I'm going to stop when I reach my desired final size of 17 inches when I do that last pattern. So I am just a little over 5.5 inches of beaded section for this orange tulip. So I'm going to switch over to another color, and so my next color is going to be yellow. And I'm almost also at the end of my bracelet and also at the end of my thread. So I'm actually just going to stop with this thread for now and just leave that, and I'm going to add some thread now. Alright, so to add more thread, I have just cut myself another 5.5 feet or so of thread, and I'm going to add thread by doing what we did earlier, which is to tie a simple overhand knot on that leftmost strand, and you're going to do the rightmost strand if you are left-handed. And I'm just going to tie a simple overhand knot and make sure to leave about 6 to 8 inches of tail for me to weave in again later. And I'm just going to leave these two tails alone, and I'm going to put my longer side of the thread under all of the warp strands, and I'm just going to continue beading from here like I have done before. So this is my next row for my new thread, and I'm just going to add it and bead like what we have been doing. So I'm just going to pop it up through the vertical warp strands and put my needle through each bead and over all of the vertical warp strands. And so just keep going until you're about an inch from the top edge, and we'll rotate the bracelet so that we can add more length to it and continue beading. So I'm about an inch from the end, so now I'm going to rotate my piece, so I'll show you how to do that now. So the first thing I'm going to do is to take off my wing nuts, and then I'm going to pop off this small piece of wood. And what that's going to do is it's going to create some slack on this bracelet so that you can rotate it. But before I rotate anything, I'm just gonna put my wing nuts back for security so that this isn't wobbling around. So I'm just going to rotate the bracelet this way. Oh, take out your needle if you're using one. So I'm just gonna rotate the bracelet. Until I have about 1.5 inches of bracelet still on the right side of the loom. And then I'm going to take out the slack by removing the wing nuts again. Then I'm going to turn the loom so that the bracelet is facing away from me. So I've zoomed you in a little bit just so you can see what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to take the piece of wood that I removed and I'm going to place it on top of the rods, and I'm going to hold the loom, and with my thumb I'm going to push on this end slotted piece of wood until the piece of wood has dropped down into that slot again and has stretched out my bracelet and created the tension on my warp strands again. So it's just going to drop down there and create that tension. So now I'm going to replace my wing nuts to secure this slotted piece of wood again. Oh, and I just noticed that this piece of string got shoved in there, so I'm just going to free that piece of string because you don't want anything to catch anywhere. So now I'm going to turn this over. So at the moment, there is a slight bit of stretching going on here where the beads are being separated in this corner because this corner is stretching out this thread a little bit, but that's okay. Later on, when we take the bracelet off of the loom, we can just massage this a little bit to get the beads to go back to where they're supposed to be. So from here, I'll just keep beading this yellow tulip pattern until I get to my wrist size of around 5.5 inches. And then I'll switch over to my third pattern, which is going to be red tulips. And I'm going to keep beading until I get close again to the top by about 1 inch. And then we'll rotate it again and I'll show you how to do that again. And also, if you run out of thread and you need to add more thread, just add the new thread the way that I showed you earlier, and we will tie off all of our ends at the very end. Alright, so I've gone on to my next color and I am close to the edge now, so I'm going to go ahead and rotate this again to make more space for further beading. So again, to do that, I'm going to take out the wing nuts. And I'm going to take out this thin piece of wood. I'm going to push in this slotted wooden piece so that there will be slack on this bracelet. And I'm going to, actually, if you are able to manage it, you can just rotate it from here. I'm just holding on to the end piece so it doesn't come flying out while you're rotating this. And when you're rotating, you just want to try to rotate as straight as possible to maintain your spacing for your warp strands. You don't want to slide this left and right so that it'll be easier to maintain the spacing. And actually, I don't think I will need that much more, so I'm just going to stop here, and I'm going to now turn my loom over again, like this, and make sure all your threads are clear so they don't accidentally get stuck again. And now I'm going to take my thin piece of wood, and I'm going to hold on to the two rods with my hand, and with my thumb I'm just going to push this thin piece of wood and stretch out my thread until it clicks back into that space between these rods and the slotted end, and it tightens up my tension again for my warp strands and my bracelet. And now I'm going to rotate the loom, and I'm going to put the wing nuts back. And that secures everything. So now you have all the space to continue beading. So from here you can just keep beading, and for me I'm going to stop when I get to 17 inches. Alright, so it looks like I'm just a little bit past 17 inches after putting in that 7th red tulip on the side. So I'm gonna go ahead and start tying off all of my tails. So to start tying off my tails, the first thing I'm going to do is go back one row like this and come out somewhere in the middle. So not at the very last bead of your row, but just somewhere in the middle like this. And I'm going to, and then I'm going to pick up a thread bridge. Now there's a thread bridge running under and one running over because of how we've been weaving, and I'm just going to pick up the thread bridge that is running over like this. So just the one that is running over. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a knot. So to draw a knot, you're just going to pull your needle, and it's going to make a loop, and so you're just going to put your needle through this loop like that and draw that knot. And then I'm just going to go back into the opposite direction on the same row as where I tie that knot. So I'm going to go to the right this time. And come out somewhere in the middle. And pull that knot into a bead to hide it. Like that. Then I'm going to go up another row and pick up another of the upper thread bridges. So like that. Just pick up a upper thread bridge and draw another knot like this. So put your needle through that loop and put your needle through some beads and come out again somewhere in the middle. And now I'm just going to do some zigzags and loops so that I can further secure my thread, and I'm not going to do any more knots because I only like to do 2. So I'm going to go up and to the right. Then I'm going to go up and to the left. I'm going to go up and to the right again. And I'm going to loop back down like this. And I'll just loop back down again. And I'm going to loop back down again. And that's good enough. You can just cut it usually, but because I just want to make my weaving with this thread, I'm gonna go ahead and just leave it and I won't cut it. And I'll just loop back all the way down to make my weaving. So you're just gonna go ahead and do the same thing for all your other tails. These are tails from when I had to add new thread, and the way I would weave them back is I would crisscross them like this. So for this tail, I'm going to weave this going up in this direction, and then for this tail, I'm going to weave this going down in this direction, and that way they're going in opposite directions. We are not filling the same row of beads with two weft strands and possibly overfilling them. Alright, so I've just gone and tied off all my edges so there are no more crazy strands of thread. So I'm going to show you now how to create the weaving to finish off your ends. So this is the end that I told you about that I didn't cut because I had extra thread that I could use to create the weaving. So I'm just going to weave all the way to the last row. And for this last row, I'm actually going to come all the way to the very end. Like this, all the way to the end. And now to create the weaving, I'm going to go under, over my warp strands. So I'm going to go under, like this, over, under, over, under, over, under, over. And I'm ending on an over. As you can see, this thread is going to go over this last warp strand. So now to hook this warp strand, this leftmost warp strand, I'm going to go under and then over. So you're just going to alternate, kind of like making a weaving like this. And you're just going to shove the end of your thread to the edge of your beads like this to keep them neat and to make sure they're all flush. And I'm just going to go another 2 rows. I'm just going to go left and then right. So total is 4. So I went left, right, left, right. So now I have this much of a weaving at the very edge, so I'm just gonna tie off by making a loop like this and putting my needle through this loop. And I'll do that one more time, so I'll make a loop like this and put my needle through this loop. So now I've done a double knot, and what I'll do is I'll just go somewhere in the middle before I cut my thread. So this side is done, and you don't want to make your weaving too thick because we're still gonna tie knots at the end and then we're gonna add glue to it. And if you make your weaving too thick, then this will become too bulky and it will be hard to slide into your sliding and tube clasp. So for this other side, say you didn't have any thread, so what I would do is I would just take a length of thread, about a little over a foot is probably fine, So I've threaded my needle, and all I'm gonna do is grab a thread bridge over on this side. So grab a thread bridge, and I'm going to pull my needle through until I reach close to the end of my piece of thread, and I'm just going to tie a single overhand knot. So a very simple knot like this, just to secure this thread so that I can start my weaving. And then I'm gonna put my needle through and exit on the last bead of this row like this. So I'm exiting on that last bead so that, whoops. So after exiting that last bead, I can make my weaving. So I'm going to do the same. I'm gonna go under, over, and I'm gonna go right, left, right, left. So just 4 times. I'm actually going to go ahead and cut this thread after I finish my weaving, and now I'm going to tie a couple of knots. So I'm gonna put my needle under the warp strand and make a loop and tie a knot like this, and one more time. And now I'm just going to stick my needle to exit somewhere in the middle and pull my thread through and just cut my thread. So now that weaving is done, so now we can release the bracelet and start tying knots and gluing them down. Alright, so to release the bracelet, the first thing I'll do is take out the wing nuts, and then take out the thin piece of wood and push the slotted end piece inwards to release the tension from this bracelet. And now I'm just going to take this bracelet off. And as you're taking the bracelet off, you'll notice that actually the gaps that were in the corners that were caused by the thread stretching have disappeared, and the thread, having lost its tension, has pretty much just gone back into place so that there's no more gaps in the beads that were there in those corners. So I've just folded the bracelet in half before I cut the loops into individual strands so that I can maximize the length that I have to work with for making my knots. So now I'm just going to go ahead and cut my loops into individual strands like this. So as usual, I have protected my work surface with a piece of plastic so that I can protect it from the glue that I will be laying down for gluing down the knots. And the glue that I will be using is E6000 Plus, which is the low odor version of E6000. You can also use regular E6000, but know that it's going to smell really bad, so that's why I go with E6000 Plus. But you should always use this with adequate ventilation. So I'm just going to open this and put a little bit on my work surface. So when working with E6000 Plus, know that it's very gummy and stretchy like this. So it can get really messy really fast, so you just want to be very careful while working with it and only add small amounts that you can control. So I'm going to start knotting my warp strands. I'm going to pick out the leftmost warp strand, which is doubled, so it counts as 1. And I'm also going to pick up the one next to it. And I'm going to tie a surgeon's knot. So to tie a surgeon's knot, you're going to go left over right like this and put your tail through the loop twice. So once and twice, and you're going to end up with something very twisty looking like this. Now before I draw down my knot fully, I like to grab a tiny bit of E6000 Plus, which as I mentioned is very, very gummy as you can see. So I'm only going to be using a very small amount, and I'm going to put a little bit on the end of my thread. And then I'm going to draw down the knot all the way to the edge of my weaving and tighten up the weaving, but not too much to the point where you're distorting your beadwork, but you just want it to be clean. And so last time I went left over right, and now I'm going to go right over left like this and put it through once. And then I'm going to do left over right and put it through once. If you're having a hard time with gluing down in the middle of knotting, you don't have to do it. You can just glue your knots down afterwards. So I'm going to do the surgeon's knot one more time, but just to repeat the process, it's left over right and then put it through twice, right over left, put it through once, left over right, put it through once. So let's do it again. Left over right, put it through twice, and it'll look very twisted like this. And again, optional, you can drop down some glue into that end before you tie the knot fully, or not. You can just do this afterwards and draw it all the way down, and then right over left, so right over left, and then put it through once. And then left over right, put it through once. So just do the rest. So when I'm done doing all of my knots, I'm just going to add more glue over all my knots and also on my weaving to secure it even further. And I'll do this for both the front and the back section. And it's okay if it's a little bit messy and gets a little bit into your last row of beads. This last row is going to go into your sliding end tube clasp, so it won't be seen. So when you're satisfied with the amount of glue that you've put down, you can do the other side. Alright, so I've just finished both ends, so I'm going to take the masking tape out, and what I like to do is I like to grab my loom and I'm going to lay out the bracelet on the loom with the ends hanging out so that the glue can dry without sticking to the plastic or anything else. And the glue takes 24 hours to cure, so I'm going to wait until tomorrow to finish off by attaching my sliding end tube clasp. And you just also want to make sure that when you put your loom down on your plastic surface that you don't accidentally put your loom down where you've put your glue. Alright, so it's been about a day, so the glue has had some time to cure, and it has cured to a gummy consistency. So now I'm going to go ahead and trim off the ends, making sure to leave a little bit of a tail so that I don't accidentally cut off any of my knots. And then afterwards, I'm going to put some E6000 glue onto my plastic surface. And then I'm going to take my sliding end tube clasp, and right now it's only open 45 degrees on one side. So I'm going to take my plier and open it up some more to closer to a 90-degree angle so that it will be easier for me to slide the last row of my beads into the sliding end tube clasp. Afterwards, I'm going to take a thin piece of wire and I'm going to go ahead and grab some glue and put that in to my sliding end tube clasp for some extra security, and I'm going to try to avoid the open slotted area so that the glue doesn't seep out. Then I'm just going to very slowly and carefully slide my last row of beads into the sliding end tube clasp. And as you can see, the cured glue as well as the knots have added bulk to that last row, and so that's why we don't want to make our weaving too thick, otherwise it would just be too difficult to put everything inside the sliding end tube clasp. Once everything is inside, I'm going to start closing it up with my pliers about 45 degrees, and then for the rest of the way I'm just going to tap it on my work surface until it is fully closed. And once it is fully closed, I just want to make sure that if the sliding end tube clasp is slightly larger than my width, that I just center my loom work on the sliding end tube clasp so that it'll look more balanced. And then I'm just going to do the same for the other side. So to wrap up, I will be using a split ring. A split ring is like a coil, like a keychain. So there's no gaps and it is more secure than a traditional jump ring, which does have a gap. And I'm doing that because I find that this metal hook on this sliding end tube clasp is very thin and it tends to slide out of the opening of a regular jump ring. So I won't have that issue if I use a split ring because there's no opening. To open a split ring, you're going to need a split ring opener like this. And to open a split ring, I'm just going to hook one side to open it like this. And I'm going to go ahead and drop down my lobster clasp like this, and also one side of my bracelet. And then to attach everything, I'm just going to rotate it with my plier. And now everything is attached. So I'm going to do the same for the other side. I'm just going to open up the split ring. And I'm going to attach both of my charms that I have already made in advance. And also the other side of my bracelet. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate everything. And now my charms are attached. So these are actually tulip charms. And even though the color doesn't quite match, I'm using them because these are literally my only beads that are tulips. So I thought it would be cute to pair them with my tulip bracelet. So here is the final result. I hope that you like it. I think that it definitely matches the tulips that I see that are blooming everywhere around me these days. And yeah, the spring here has been pretty cold, but finally it's getting warmer, so that's good. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me for this tutorial. I appreciate your watching, and thank you so much again, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!